everyone, welcome back to Shop Life. My name is Jason, and today we're going to be talking about arguably the best M car ever made, the E46 M3. So today's video we are going to be discussing the common issues of the E46 M3. I've done several videos like this before with various different models and chassis. I even have one for the E46 chassis overall. And I'll have all of those videos linked down below, as well as some of the repairs for the issues I'm going to be discussing today, and some more in-depth information on all of those. All of that stuff will be linked down below. But let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to start right here in the front of the car with this S54 engine. So here's the heart of the beast, the S54. The S54 was an award-winning, high-revving, and even produced a decent amount of horsepower. In the US, we got 333 horsepower out of this engine. But with those high revs, there were some issues that a lot of owners encountered even early on, and those were with the Vanos system. So the Vanos system is what allows, it's pretty much like VTEC for Hondas if you're familiar with that. It's the variable timing, and that's what's really allowing this engine to rev out so high, almost up to 9,000 RPM. Some of the issues that the Vanos system suffers from are the seals just wearing out over time. Sometimes it starts rattling, but you can have, replacement parts to prevent that rattle or get rid of it. But the more detrimental and more catastrophic failures started occurring when the exhaust hub tabs started shearing off. So if you just lose one tab, you'll start hearing some noise. But if you lose both, that's very catastrophic because you're gonna, lose all that oil pressure, because that's what drives that oil pump disc on the Vanos system. Now, another detrimental issue was the actual sprocket bolts. So the bolts that hold the sprockets onto the camshafts, those also tended to shear out. But there are methods to bulletproof this Vanos, even if you're not having any issues. And if you are having issues, there are ways to fix it and upgrade at the same time. I have videos that go over that entire system, how to diagnose it and all of that, as well as how to bulletproof it. All that stuff will be linked down below. Make sure you check it out. Now let's move on to the next big issue with the S54, which BMW kind of solved midway through the E46 M3 production run. So this is the rod bearings. Early on, when the cars were still under warranty, the early production models, 2001 through 2003, the dealership started noticing a lot of these engines were spinning rod bearings. And they decided to upgrade the rod bearings that were available on the S54 right at the factory. So after 2003, so production year 2004, they started with the new rod bearings in the S54. And with those upgraded rod bearings, they also changed some of the designs, so the rod bolts were different and all of that as well. So that's something that you really want to look out for. If you're looking to purchase or you own one that's before 2003, make sure those rod bearings have already been replaced. And BMW used to do it as I believe it was a service bulletin, so they did it for free for most of them. So make sure all that stuff is taken care of. If it hasn't been, make sure you do it as soon as possible. But now here's the caveat, even the newer engines, 2004 and newer, you should still look into doing those rod bearings, because regardless of if they were done, through warranty or not, or even if your engine came with upgraded rod bearings, around 150, 160,000 miles, those rod bearings are showing quite a bit of wear. And it also depends on how the car was driven. If it was tracked or if it had a lot of short drives, this all adds up to wear and tear. So make sure that even if you're close to 150,000 miles, just go ahead and get those rod bearings done, get that peace of mind. And there's quite a few upgrades on that available as well. We're actually going to have a video hopefully very soon when we do those rod bearings on this specific engine, and I'll go over that whole process as well, which will eventually get linked down below. Now, a couple of other things on this engine that tend to go out are the throttle position sensors. So this S54 setup actually has 3 throttle position sensors, mainly because it's got individual throttle bodies. And 2 of the sensors are right here in the engine bay, one right here in the front, which is very easy to get to, one underneath the intake plenum towards cylinder 6, close to the throttle body actuator, and the third one is actually built into the pedal. So all that stuff is fairly simple to diagnose and fairly simple to replace, but I thought I would mention it here because it is a common issue that sometimes does stump quite a few people. But honestly, that actually takes care of most of the catastrophic issues with the S54. A couple of other things that you should know, that if you own one of these cars, you want to make sure that you're getting your valve adjustment done every 30 to 40,000 miles. On the non-M E46s, we never had to worry about valve adjustments or anything like that. But with the S54, that is something that's common maintenance. So make sure all of those valves are getting checked every 30,000 miles. If you're looking to purchase one, make sure you have some kind of history of all of that done as well. That's not really catastrophic. You know, the only thing that will really happen is you'll start losing power, and you'll also maybe hear some engine noises and stuff like that. But you know, it actually goes to show if people were doing that regularly, shows how well that engine was maintained. Now, another thing that's a common issue is the CPV O-ring. So that's the constant pressure valve that's on the side of the engine. It's kind of hard to get to, but it's very simple to replace, and you can upgrade it. All it is a small O-ring, which usually just gives out over time because it's made out of normal rubber. And with all the heat cycles and stuff, it just wears out. And once that happens, you start getting a pretty big oil leak, matter of fact. And a lot of people mistake it for valve cover gaskets, oil pan gaskets, and all of that. I've got a video on that that will also be linked down below. Now, another issue that I've noticed with all my experience of working on these cars, and not that many people really mention anywhere, even on the forums, is the starter itself. So with the S54 in specific, the starter tends to intermittently go out. So sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. And I've noticed that it's actually even worse on SMG cars. Not entirely sure why that is, but the non-Ms don't really suffer from that issue. The non-Ms, what usually happens when the starter goes out, it goes out. It's just not gonna turn on. On these cars, sometimes you'll park it and it'll turn right back on. Sometimes it won't. So that's something that, you know, you want to just make sure that if you're having some kind of intermittent issues before you start really tearing into anything else, double check that starter and see when it was replaced. But one of the great things that BMW did, and I feel like they do this with most of the M cars, is they do make everything else beefier. Like the cooling system. If you guys are at all familiar with the E46 chassis, that is its Achilles heel. Always, all the non-Ms, all the plastic components for the cooling system, they always go out and leave people stranded on the road. But the M3s, they actually have a very robust cooling system. The water pump's all metal, impeller and everything, the thermostat, everything, none of that stuff is really plastic. The real plastic on this cooling system is just the expansion tank, a couple of hoses that go to the radiator, and the side tanks on the radiator. But none of that stuff really goes out that often. I mean, obviously, if you own an M car, you want to do preventative maintenance, and that's something that I would replace every 100 to 150,000 miles anyways. And there's also upgrades available for all of that. So this chassis, just overall, the E46, if you guys just do some research in terms of aftermarket, people are still coming out with new aftermarket things for the chassis overall. And not just the M cars, even the non-Ms. You know, there's all kinds of cooling system stuff still being developed, cosmetics, performance, all of that. And that just goes to show how much of an enthusiast car this really is. And the M3 is the top of the line when it comes to the E46. So you know good and well, there's gonna be more and more aftermarket stuff, aftermarket support for years to come. So that pretty much concludes all the stuff that usually goes wrong with the S54 itself. But the M3 was actually available with, actually at that time, it was one of the, I guess, one of the most technological advancements that BMW had installed in cars as far as transmissions are concerned. So the E46 M3, I believe 2002 was the first year where it was available with an SMG transmission. So the SMG is a sequential manual gearbox, and all it really is just a bunch of hydraulic stuff taking the place of, you know, you actually having to shift the car and press the clutch. All of that gets controlled by a hydraulic pump, hydraulic lines, and a couple of sensors and stuff like that. So it was very attractive to a lot of people because it still feels and drives like a manual transmission car. You still have all that power and everything. You don't lose anything from the automatic transmission. You still feel the shifts and everything. It's just you don't have to shift. You don't have to push the clutch in. So much easier in traffic. And honestly, that system was actually kind of adopted by Ferrari when they came out with their F1 transmission in their F430s, I believe, and some other models that they had. And that was a couple of years after the M3 was already done with this production run. So that just goes to show that that technology was way ahead of its time. But as you guys know, with technology, it doesn't really last long. I mean, today and tomorrow, there's gonna be a huge advancement in technology, and it pretty much outdates everything else. But that's not really the issue with the SMG. The SMG, I don't think there's technological issues that happen over time, but it's more along the lines of the hydraulic system. Hydraulic systems, they just have a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. There's a lot of fluid lines. There's a lot of stuff that's moving around, and it has to have very tight clearances. And that's where the issue resides, the SMG pump itself. When that SMG pump goes out, it's not cheap. It's almost $4,000 to replace that pump. But the good news is, if you don't want to replace that pump and don't want to spend $4,000 on replacing that, you can actually convert the transmission to a true manual, because the transmissions are identical. The only difference is just all that hydraulic stuff. It's almost like BMW used it as an afterthought and they added all that SMG stuff afterwards. So the transmission between manual and SMG is exactly the same. There's all kinds of stuff available to convert it. There's people that provide this service. And I actually even have a video on this, and I will have that link down below as well. But along with that SMG pump, another common issue is just a couple of the sensors. The gear position sensor, sometimes the temperature sensor goes out on this, and it just causes a lot of havoc because then you can't really shift. It goes into limp mode and all of that, which is why I always recommend, instead of trying to fix the SMG system, at this point, it's usually cheaper and more cost effective, and people will pay more for a true manual compared to a sequential hydraulically assisted SMG transmission. So that's always a plus. You're gonna get most of your value back out, and it adds value to the car. So win-win situation, makes it more fun to drive, at least in my opinion. But now we're gonna go and focus on the last part of the drivetrain, which is the rear end. And that's pretty much what really differentiates the M3 versus the non-M. The drivetrain, I mean, that's what you're paying for. You're paying for all of this technology, more horsepower, and just all of the more robust items that BMW's M division always puts on the M cars. So the rear end on this car is a limited slip differential, but it is definitely a huge upgrade when you compare it to the non-M cars. And it does make the car handle a lot better and just makes it much more sportier, honestly. You can do two-wheel peel. I mean, come on, who doesn't want to spin both wheels when they're doing a burnout? But that's where the issue arises. The limited slip differential over time just wears out. And once it starts wearing out, you start getting annoying clunks in the back, groaning noises, grinding noises, and leaks and all kinds of stuff. So that's the thing with that limited slip differential, and that's the thing with more high mileage E46 M3s or even tracked M3s. That limited slip wears out a lot quicker. So that's something that you really want to be on the lookout for. There's all kinds of companies that rebuild them. There's ways to upgrade them as well. And there's also ways to just get rid of the E46 M3 limited slip and upgrade to one from a whole different chassis. So there's all kinds of options for that, but they are not cheap, and not really any limited slip differential is cheap when it comes to any European car. So that's something that you want to look out for. But that's not really the big issue here. I know a lot of you guys that are familiar with the E46 chassis are waiting for this bombshell, which is the subframe mounting points. Man, I don't know why BMW did not catch on with the E46 at this point, because the E36 also suffered from the same issue, and that was the subframe mounting points actually ripping out of the car, cracking and stuff like that. And what I'm talking about is actually how the whole rear end, the subframe itself, mounts to the car. The chassis itself was experiencing failure points with spot welds just pretty much just disintegrating, cracks occurring in the chassis, all kinds of stuff. And they still happen. I mean, even on the 2006, the last year model that the E46 were produced in, those also suffer from cracks. BMW says they upgraded some of the items in the production line to account for, that weakness. But honestly, it's gonna happen. It's just a design flaw in general. But fear not, if you have enough money and your wallet's big enough, you can also fix that or even bulletproof it, prevent it from happening. There's companies out there like Vincebar, CMP. There's quite a few people making, little strut bars or also just reinforcement plates. Those have been around for a long time. You can do structural foam. There's all kinds of options. And once again, as you guys know, I love the E46 chassis. We own so many E46s. So of course, we have a video that goes over that. That'll also be linked down below. Now, as I was saying earlier, the M division, they make more robust parts for the M cars. So suspension on this car is much better than non-M's. It's got beefier control arms, better steering. Everything honestly lasts a very long time if you take care of it. The suspension overall, 150,000 miles on these cars, it's really not that bad. Control arms are still usually original. Control arm bushings might need to be replaced, but even the bushings are different and they're upgraded, more robust. The engine mounts are different, transmission mounts are different, the drive shaft center support bearing is different, the drive shaft is bigger. Everything is just bigger and better, and that's why it costs much more. If you guys are following the market currently, you guys know these E46 M3 prices just have skyrocketed. I mean, even convertibles are pulling what coupes were pulling 2-3 years ago. And not that many people want E46 M3 convertibles because of that added weight. But hey, right now is the market. It's a seller's market. You can sell it for whatever somebody's willing to pay. But that pretty much concludes our common issues with the E46 M3. There's really not much else to it. You know, if you guys want to know more about just the normal cosmetic stuff, that's very similar to non-M E46s. So make sure you go check out that common problems video of the E46 chassis overall. I really hope this video helps you out, especially if you're in the market for an E46 M3, or if you already have one and need to catch up on some maintenance or want to do some preventative stuff. Make sure you check out all of those videos to go more in depth to all the issues that I talked about, and also how to bulletproof and repair them. And one last thing, if you haven't noticed, I've got an E46 M3 on my shirt. This shirt is available on my website at www.shoplifetv.com. We only have a couple more of these left. Make sure you check that out. We're never going to make these again. If you guys love the E46 chassis as much as I do, go ahead and pick yourself up one. Helps out the shop, helps out all of our projects that we have going on, and just, you know, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, and also go check out my Instagram and follow me on there as well. We've got a lot of projects going on. We really only upload on YouTube once a week, but we try to stay more up to date on Instagram so you guys can stay up to date with whatever we're doing, our projects, travel, whatever it is. Always good content on there as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We've got much more stuff being filmed on this E46 M3 in particular. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in our next video.